Hi, welcome to English Avenue Today. Today I am going to retell one of the most fascinating and mysterious stories in modern history, the mystery of the Titanic. You may have seen the film or read a short article, yet here we will slow down and walk through the story so that familiar moments feel new, sharp, and clear. Settle in and follow the arc from an incandescent dream of luxury to a frozen April night in the North Atlantic. By the end, you will understand the full sweep ambition, engineering, confidence, error, tragedy, and legacy, while sharpening your English through clean narration, purposeful vocabulary, and memorable storytelling structures. Some details may surprise you. Stay with the story to learn history while strengthening language skills and narrative fluency. In the early 1900s, transatlantic travel belonged to the great ocean liners, and two rivals, White Star Line and Cunard, competed for prestige. Cunard's Lusitania and Mauretania were champions of raw speed. White Star bet on a different crown: comfort, smoothness, mass, and elegance. From that strategy emerged a trio, Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic, designed to redefine what a passenger ship could be. Titanic, built by Harland and Wolff in Belfast, began in March 1909 and took almost 3 years, with thousands of workers rotating through day and night. The scale was astonishing: 880, 2 feet, 269 meters, long, 175 feet, 53 meters, tall, nearly 3 football fields end to end. People did not dream only of arriving faster. They dreamed of traveling inside a floating palace that announced a new industrial age. With its size and design ambition, Titanic was White Star's answer to Cunard's Speed Crown, a confident wager that the highest form of travel would privilege experience space, silence, stability, and style over simply racing the clock. The ship was more than transport. It was a symbol of technological optimism and the age's faith that steel and steam could master distance and weather. The legend of Unsinkable sprang from engineering choices. Titanic possessed 16 watertight compartments, divided by bulkheads. Even if 4 flooded, designers believed the ship would remain afloat. This sounded like cutting-edge safety, and newspapers repeated the claim. Philip Franklin, White Star Line's vice president, spoke confidently in public, and the phrase "unsinkable" hardened into a collective assurance. It became more than a technical label. It functioned as a message about progress itself, a promise that design could domesticate the ocean. That pride, once set, shaped perceptions on board and beyond. Passengers, officers, and the world assumed the ship embodied the peak of maritime safety. Yet the belief that built calm also dulled caution. In a commercial contest to prove superiority, Unsinkable shaped expectations, and when events turned, it shaped the tragedy too. The irony lives in the details. The very feature that impressed the public, the compartmentalization, had limits that would matter under specific, unlucky conditions. Boarding the Titanic was like entering a 5-star hotel at sea. Hand-carved wood paneling polished to a warm glow, stained glass alive with daylight, and 2 grand staircases, especially the first-class grand staircase with its iron balustrades, gilded ornament, and glass dome. Amenities astonished for the era: a heated swimming pool, a Turkish bath, an electric bath, a gymnasium with exercise machines, a squash court, libraries, 2 barbershops, cafes, smoking rooms, and an a la carte restaurant so exclusive that diners paid extra. First-class cabins featured silk curtains, elegant furniture, and the finest bedding. Second-class accommodation equaled or exceeded first class on many other ships. Third class, though simple, still offered more comfort than most contemporaries. Splendor has a price. The ship cost $7, $5 million in 1.912 framed in the video, as roughly $200 million today. And tickets reflected the hierarchy: first-class fares around $4,350, likened to $100,000 today. Second class about $60 to $1,500, and third class $15, $40 to $400. $1,000. Titanic did more than carry passengers. It carried aspirations, public displays of status for the wealthy, and a pragmatic doorway to new lives for immigrants in the lower decks. The contrasting experiences on board luxury above, frugality below were bound together by the same hull, steam, and schedule, making the ship a compact portrait of the early 20th century. When Titanic was ready, excitement surged across two continents. On the 10th of April 1912, the ship's maiden voyage from Southampton to New York drew crowds to the quay. Families waved, photographers worked, and the largest moving object ever built slid from the dock with smooth, theatrical confidence. A total of 2,224 passengers and crew sailed. Among them were some of the world's wealthiest and most recognizable John Jacob Astor IV, the indomitable Margaret Molly Brown, and Isidore and Ida Strauss of Macy's, alongside hundreds of third-class immigrants, traveling on hope as much as on a ticket. The crossing began smoothly, at about 21.5 knots. Passengers strolled on sunlit decks, lingered in dining rooms, and relaxed in cabins, wrapped in a sense of perfection that made any break from normality harder to imagine. The weather was pleasant, the sea calm, the engines worked with measured rhythm. If confidence had a sound, it was the steady thrum beneath polished floors. 2 days out, Titanic received the first warning of ice, unsurprising in April, on North Atlantic lanes. On April 14, the warnings multiplied. 7 separate messages, transmitted in Morse from ships ahead, reported large bergs in Titanic's path. The chain of communication faltered. Some messages weren't marked urgent and never reached Captain Edward John Smith. Others arrived at the wireless room, where operators busy dispatching private traffic for passengers did not prioritize the cautions. Even the warnings that did reach decision-makers were filtered through confidence, routine, and the day's calm. Unsinkable had settled into a working assumption, reinforced by 4 days of easy weather and smooth progress. The captain did not reduce speed. The ship pressed on at roughly 21.5 knots, about 40 kilometers per hour in the video's conversion. Yet that evening unfolded into a navigator's trap. The night was moonless. Stars gave thin light. The ocean lay glassy and flat. Normally, surf breaking at the base of icebergs throws white water that helps lookouts spot danger. But on a windless, polished sea, the ice wore darkness as camouflage. In the crow's nest, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee scanned without binoculars. The officer who had them had left the ship before departure and failed to hand them over. In short, warnings existed. The environment hid hazards, and a powerful sense of safety dulled risk perception, an alignment of human and natural factors that set the stage for disaster. Complacency seldom announces itself. It arrives disguised as business as usual. At 11:39 p.m., Fleet spotted a massive dark shape dead ahead. He rang the bell 3 times the danger signal and phoned the bridge. "Iceberg right ahead." First Officer William Murdoch ordered a hard turn to port and reversed the engines, but events were already in motion. 37 seconds later, around 11:40 p.m., Titanic scraped along the iceberg. Ice showered onto the forward well deck, yet the crucial damage lay below the waterline. Icebergs aren't gentle. They are ancient and dense, edged like chisels, with most of their bulk hidden underwater. Titanic's 1,912 steel, in near-freezing conditions, could behave more brittly than later standards would allow, making plates more likely to crack than bend. Some rivets made of weaker wrought iron could pop when raked by pressure, opening seams between plates. The result was not one film-worthy gash, but a series of 6 narrow openings. They looked small to the eye, but the sea pushed through them under pressure, and water did not negotiate. In the engine spaces, the crew grasped the severity with professional clarity. In first-class lounges, the sensation registered as a faint shudder and a scraping sound enough for jokes about bumping something. That mismatch between topside perception and below-deck reality cost precious early minutes. Technically, the explanation turns on 3 prongs: the iceberg's mass and cutting power, cold embrittled steel behavior, and rivet vulnerability acting together as the ship sideswiped the ice. The ocean had found the exact set of limits embedded in the ship's materials and seams. By midnight, the forward 5 compartments were flooding beyond the design's 4-compartment survival threshold, making the unthinkable undeniable. The unsinkable ship was sinking. Captain Smith convened his senior officers and issued firm orders. Begin lowering lifeboats, transmit distress calls, keep passengers calm, avoid panic. Arithmetic became destiny. Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats with room for roughly 1,178 people, far short of the 2,224 on board. More could have been installed, but open and elegant decks had been favored. In the wireless room, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride sent CQD, come quickly, distress, and then SOS, the newer, clearer international signal. RMS Carpathia, about 58 miles, 93 kilometers, away, received the call. Captain Arthur Rostron swung his ship around and pushed for maximum speed about 17 knots, still hours away. A nearer ship, SS Californian, did not respond. Her sole wireless operator had gone to bed at 11:30 p.m., minutes before Titanic began pleading for help. On deck, the first boats were lowered into black, freezing water under electric light and the steady encouragement of the band. Disbelief mixed with uncertainty, and some early boats left half full even though the ship did not have enough total seats. Women and children first, echoed along the rail, but enforcement varied by boat and officer. Every minute, the bow sank lower. Every minute lost would matter. The crew worked with discipline amid a growing awareness. The mathematics of capacity and time was merciless. Because the bulkheads did not rise high enough, water overtopped them once it reached their upper edges and cascaded aft from compartment to compartment. By about 1:30 a.m., the bow was deeply down. Panic began to ripple. In some first-class areas, surface order remained, helped by music and the authority of uniforms. In third class, routes to the boat deck proved confusing. Doors and gates complicated movement. Language barriers slowed understanding for immigrants who did not speak English. The sea hovered around -2 degrees Celsius, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Immersion meant hypothermia in minutes. The psychology was brutal. The ship was lit and seemed stable. The boats were small, exposed, and floating in a cold void. Yet physics does not care about appearances. With each inch down by the head, deck angles steepened, surfaces slickened, and the mechanics of launching safely grew harder. Indecision ate time, and time measured life. When the numbers were finally totaled, they looked like an indictment. Out of 2,224 aboard, about 705 survived, most of them in boats. Many women and children, while over 1,500 perished. A large share of them men who gave up places or never reached a seat in time. That night, courage often looked like quiet compliance, a steady hand helping a stranger over a thwart, and then stepping back. Around 2:15 a.m., stresses exceeded strength, and Titanic broke in two. The bow, heavy with seawater, plunged first. The stern rose, hung for moments, then followed into the dark. Boats in a scattered ring watched the silhouette vanish and heard the last great sounds of metal failing. At about 4 a.m., Carpathia reached the perimeter and began hauling survivors aboard, many too numb to climb and hoisted with lines and blankets. Crew members moved quickly, offering hot drinks, clothing, and quiet reassurance. By 8:30 a.m., the work was complete. Carpathia turned for New York with the saved, leaving behind debris, luggage, shoes, and more than 1,500 lives unclaimed by dawn. The timing window offers a painful counterfactual. Had a nearer ship kept her radio manned and moved promptly, the death toll might have been far lower. History, however, locked the sequence into a descent of roughly 2 hours, bracketed by missed chances and cold arithmetic. SS Californian, a British steamer, had stopped for the night in ice, engines off. Around 11 p.m., her crew saw the lights of a large ship, Titanic, in the distance. Rockets arced white into the sky, a classic distress signal meant to summon investigation. Second Officer Herbert Stone reported them to Captain Stanley Lord and noted the big ship appeared to have stopped. Lord dismissed the concern, assuming celebration and evidence-free guess with fateful consequences. The other crucial failure was procedural. Californian's wireless had been switched off when operator Cyril Evans went to bed at 11:30 p.m., so the ship never heard Titanic's CQD divided by SOS. Debate has raged for decades over distance and feasibility. In the video's telling, Californian was about 20 miles, 37 kilometers, away, and might have reached the scene around 2:33:00 a.m., earlier than Carpathia's 4 a.m., to pull hundreds from boats and the freezing water. Whatever the exact numbers, the investigations that followed forged change. Continuous 24/7 wireless watches became mandatory, so no cry for help would go unheard. Distress rocket protocols were clarified. Nighttime rockets mean danger by default, not festivities. Captains were charged with a duty to investigate any unusual nocturnal signals or stationary ships. Captain Lord's reputation never recovered. He spent the rest of his life contesting the verdict of history, yet the controversy shadowed him until his death in 1962. The reforms read like humility codified. Technology and tonnage are meaningless if the system's eyes and ears, people, and communication are switched off at the critical hour. After the 15th of April 1912, Titanic lay in darkness for decades. The exact resting place was unknown. At about 12,500 feet, 3,800 meters, the wreck was far beyond mid-century reach. In 1985, Dr. Robert Ballard and his team used remote vehicles to locate the site. The bow was relatively intact. The stern was twisted and broken testimony to a mid-sinking break. Shoes, dishes, and luggage lay scattered, turning ordinary objects into a field of memory. Since then, scientists have watched the wreck slowly deteriorate as salt and metal-eating bacteria carve away the hull. In time, most of the ship will be claimed by chemistry and current, leaving archives, photographs, and stories to carry what iron cannot. Yet fascination endures, not merely because of size or fame, but because of what Titanic represents. The desire to build the extraordinary, the peril of overconfidence, and the human stories of survival, loss, and courage. In 2012, to mark the centenary, Australian billionaire Clive Palmer announced a vision for a modern replica Titanic II mirroring period decor such as grand staircases, elegant dining rooms, and vintage cabins, but paired with modern safety features, more lifeboats, advanced navigation, and rigorous drills, an attempt to repeat an image without repeating the mistakes. The project has faced delays and, as often reported, remains incomplete, which itself says something about the distance between ambition and execution. The closing lessons are plain enough to summarize and deep enough to practice. Overconfidence is dangerous. Nature commands respect. Preparation must be complete and tested. From those principles flow regulations that have since saved lives. Enough lifeboats for all, radios manned at all hours, and safety drills that turn procedures into muscle memory. Beyond policy stand human truths. Never give up survivors rebuilt. Always be ready. Life is unpredictable. Learn from mistakes. Errors paid for with tears can remake an industry. In that sense, Titanic is not merely the story of a ship. It is a mirror held up to human ambition and limits, a steady reminder that lasting progress demands technical brilliance, yoked to humility, discipline, and care for every weak link in the chain of people and machines. Further perspective on engineering judgment. The Titanic story shows how choices that look sensible within a period's norms can fail under extreme conditions. The bulkheads, admirable for their time, did not extend high enough. The rivets, serviceable for many routes, proved vulnerable when scraped by ice, and steel, sound under ordinary temperatures, behaved more brittly near freezing. Each element was a reasonable decision alone. Together, in the precise context of speed, darkness, calm seas, and collision geometry, they became the ingredients of catastrophe. Further perspective on risk perception. People infer safety from experience. 4 quiet days at sea feel like proof that the course is sound. Yet long stretches of normality are not guaranteed. They are only stretches of normality. When warnings are filtered through comfort, rank, and routine, even clear signals can be discounted, and minute by minute the window for graceful options narrows. Further perspective on maritime procedure. Procedures exist to be followed when the human mind clutches at normal. Women and children first sounds decisive, but it is only decisive when crews are trained, stations clear, and load plans understood. Mixed execution is the rule when practice is thin and the environment hostile. The lesson is not that rules fail, but that rules must be drilled until they are memory. Further perspective on wireless communication. The radio room was new in that era, its workload elastic. Commercial telegrams could crowd navigation warnings, and fatigue could silence a ship at the critical hour. After the disaster, the industry learned to treat wireless not as a luxury, but as a watch that never sleeps. The modern echo is obvious. When a network forms the nervous system of safety, its watches must be continuous and its priorities clear. Further perspective on class experience on board. The ship contained multiple worlds, first-class promenades and drawing rooms, second-class comforts, third-class hopes layered beneath, all bound to the same timetable and the same fate. In emergencies, information travels along the channels that exist in peacetime. If access is complex in ordinary hours, it will be more complex at night, in cold, with fear adding friction to every step. Further perspective on nighttime navigation. A moonless, flat sea is visually deceptive. The horizon gives little depth, and cues like broken surf vanish. Lookouts rely on contrast, motion, and sparkle. When the ocean is a black pane, only the unexpected silhouette remains, and by the time it appears, it may be too late. Further perspective on iceberg detection limits. Ice patrols and radar would come later, but in 1912, detection was mostly eyes and reports. Ice moves with currents and wind. A chart mark is a clue, not a guarantee. A navigator's tool is skepticism, married to prudence. Assume a report is right, and a silence is wrong. Further perspective on human factors under stress. When stress rises, attention narrows. People default to habit. Crews who practice launch sequences under calm will perform better when decks tilt. Passengers briefed clearly will hesitate less. The test of any safety system is not the beauty of its diagrams, but the steadiness of its people when the diagrams become reality. Further perspective on design trade-offs. Comfort sells tickets. Safety saves lives. The two are not enemies, but if they conflict, safety must win. Open decks look elegant on brochures. Full lifeboat sets look inelegant until the night the ocean demands arithmetic. The lesson is not only maritime. It travels wherever design meets risk. Further perspective on rescue logistics. Speed to the scene, signal clarity, and nighttime search organization matter. A ship that turns at once, doubles lookouts, and preps blankets and lamps will do more good than a ship that debates purpose. Rescue is measured in minutes, not miles. The fastest helpful motion is faster than the best intention. Further perspective on search and discovery. Locating a wreck is an exercise in patience, instrumentation, and inference. Before 1985, expeditions chased rumors, misread currents, and underestimated how debris fields drift and settle. Ballard's team combined careful mapping with towed vehicles that mowed the lawn across the seafloor, scanning for patterns rather than movie-ready silhouettes. When they finally saw boilers and scattered crockery glinting in camera lights, the emotional weight was immediate. These were not simply artifacts, but the last still life of a moving world. The site taught investigators to distinguish between violence and gravity, between damage done in the water column as the ship failed and damage done on impact with the seabed. It also changed how historians tell stories, with coordinates, angles, and evidence, not only anecdotes and memory. Further perspective on memory and commemoration. Remembrance takes many shapes. Museums gather plates, menus, tickets, and postcards to show ordinary life interrupted. Maritime memorials list names so that statistics regain human scale. Families pass down small things, letters, rings, a photograph with a handwritten date, and these things travel farther than steel. Each anniversary invites new questions, and although the answers repeat, the act of asking keeps empathy alive. The Titanic story is, among other things, a defense of empathy in public memory. It persuades us to hold the unknown stranger in mind and to regard safety rules, not as bureaucracy, but as owed respect to those who did not get a second chance. Further perspective on language learning through storytelling. Content that hangs together helps vocabulary stick. When learners meet watertight compartment beside a description of flooding, the term bonds to an image. When they read crow's nest while imagining a lookout ringing a bell 3 times, the phrase is stored as a scene rather than a puzzle. Story. Order the progression from rivalry to build, to voyage to warnings, to collision to evacuation, to rescue and inquiry to wreck and lessons creates signposts for recall. A learner can later say, first came the competition, then the building, then the maiden voyage, then the warnings, and the words ride on that structure like passengers on a reliable timetable. Picture the promenade late in the afternoon, light slanting under deck beams, the mild slap of wake against steel, the ship's steady heartbeat felt through your shoes. A steward adjusts a deck chair with a practiced flick and a small bow. 2 friends argue cheerfully about the merits of New York hotels. A child tests the limits of a new coat by twirling until dizzy. Somewhere inside, cutlery finds china with a delicate, repeated note, and someone laughs in a way that invites 3 more laughs by reflex. People who will never meet past this week walk parallel lives along the same rail. Imagine a third-class dining room at supper. Soup steaming, spoons clinking, stories trading in a dozen accents. A young couple practice the names of streets in a city they have never seen. A worker describes the job he hopes is waiting in a factory whose floor he can already smell. A grandmother blesses bread and grandchild with the same slow hand, and for a moment, the only difference between first and third class is vocabulary. Above them, a corridor glows with a warmer light, and a slower conversation about investments, operas, and cottages. On this ship, status distributes comfort unevenly, but time passes at one speed. On the boat deck at dusk, an officer checks a watch against the bridge chronometer, notes the breeze and the slight temperature drop, and studies the horizon line. The sea looks clean, almost lacquered. He knows from experience that a flat ocean can be deceptive. It removes waves that would betray the bases of larger shapes. He also knows the ship's schedule and the company's pride. A second officer passes and says, as people do when they want to say something without making too much of it, "A bit dark tonight." The first nods, agreeing both with the words and with the tone. Inside the wireless room, spark gaps chatter and paper curls. A queue of paid passenger messages grows. The operators work with the cheerful focus of people who enjoy being at the nerve center. Between telegrams come navigation notes. Each piece of paper demands a decision. Deliver now, deliver later, or ask the bridge for emphasis. Fatigue is a weak thief. It steals clarity without announcing itself. The operators are skilled. They are also human. And the night is long. Down in the engine spaces, men labor in heat and rhythm, feeding boilers and timing valves. The tempo is elemental. Coal to fire, water to steam, steam to motion. Gauges twitch, hands move. Shouted words dissolve in a world of iron and noise. Up above, a violin polishes a melody. Down below, a spanner kisses a nut with exact pressure. The ship stays one ship only because both worlds keep time. Near midnight, after the shudder and scrape, sound becomes a barometer. Doors open along a corridor. Someone steps out, and then steps back in, unsure whether the feeling merits a coat. Another person who has been bored all evening decides to go up just to have a look. An officer repeats a line. There's no immediate cause for alarm. That is meant to be both honest and calming. And in the exact tone it is spoken, It is. A few minutes later, the tone has to be a degree firmer. At a starboard boat, a bosun's call cuts through the murmur. Numbers are read, stations assigned, and hands demonstrate how to step in and hold a thwart. A mother hesitates, and then accepts a place, compressing fear into a smile for a child. A man who could press his status chooses not to, and turns away from the gunwale with an awkward nod that contains everything he will never say. In small patches across the deck, similar private decisions assemble into public fate. Farther out, after lowering, a few boats drift with oars shipped. The creak of wood speaks louder than voices. The sky looks wider at sea level. Someone in the stern sheets bites a knuckle to keep quiet. Someone amidships remembers a prayer almost by accident and then cannot stop whispering it. On the horizon, a low shape holds lights that do not move much. Someone says, "There," and someone else says, "Are you sure?" The question hangs unhelpfully in the cold. On Carpathia's bridge, a captain works a moving triangle of time, speed, and bearing. Orders pass fast, more lookouts to the wings, extra hands on deck, galley to boil water and prepare blankets. Below, sailors assemble rope ladders and slings, then reassemble them once to be sure. If there is such a thing as efficient compassion, it looks like this: practiced motions that spend no words. Further perspective on training and drills. Policy without rehearsal is a promise kept only on paper. Drills translate lines in a manual into muscle memory so that the body knows how to act when the mind is loud with adrenaline. A crew that can launch boats with eyes closed can also launch them in wind, on a slope, and with questions pulling at their sleeves. In every industry that manages risk aviation, medicine, nuclear energy, this is the central lesson borrowed from the sea: practice before pressure. Further perspective on numbers. Capacity sets boundaries before judgment even begins. If a ship sails with seats for only half the people aboard, the second half of every argument is already theoretical. Numbers are policy made visible. They are also mercy made measurable. When we say, "enough lifeboats for all," we mean that no family has to solve an impossible equation in the dark. Further perspective on design assumptions. The phrase, "within expected conditions," hides a world of guesswork. A designer estimates the largest wave, the coldest steel temperature, the swiftest likely rescue. Nature will honor none of those estimates on demand. The right habit is to add margins and then ask, what if those margins go missing? Good design respects the known. Great design respects the unknown. Further perspective on night navigation. Darkness slows recognition and compresses reaction time. A delayed sighting shortens the runway on which good decisions can accelerate. That is why prudent mariners reduce speed when conditions degrade. Speed cancels options at precisely the moment options matter most. The night magnifies the consequences of optimism. Further perspective on rescue. Rescue is a logistics problem wrapped around a human emergency. The components fuel, distance, speed, lights, lookouts, ladders, blankets, medical readiness compose a fragile chain. If one link fails, others stretch. If too many links fail, the chain parts. The solution is not drama but discipline. Checklists, prearranged signals, and a culture that assumes the call will come at the worst time. Further perspective on memory as prevention. Remembrance is not only sympathy, it is strategy. A name on a plaque cues a pause before a shortcut. A well-told story makes a trainee's hands slower on the throttle at midnight and quicker on the radio at the first ambiguous flare. Memory pays forward caution. Language focus Viennas. Narrative order. Retell the timeline in your own words using connectors. First, next, meanwhile, by midnight, afterwards, by dawn. Sequencing reinforces comprehension and anchors vocabulary. Language focus 2. Domain terms. Build a mini glossary. Watertight compartment, bulkhead, crow's nest, wireless operator, distress signal, lifeboat capacity, hypothermia, hull integrity, rivet, embrittlement. For each, write one definition and one original sentence. Language Focus 3. Collocations. Notice pairs like issue orders, lower lifeboats, send distress, maintain speed, reduce risk, conduct drills, receive warnings, overtop bulkheads, collocations, accelerate natural. Phrasing. Language Focus 4. Cause and effect. Practice because, so, therefore, as a result. Example. Because the sea was flat and moonless, lookouts struggled to see the iceberg, so the ship had less time to turn. Language Focus 5. Modality for risk. Use should, must, could, might, and ought to evaluate decisions. Captains should reduce speed in poor visibility. Wireless sets must be manned at all hours. Warnings might be ignored if routines dominate. Language Focus 6. Reporting speech. Transform direct speech into reported speech. Fleet said that there was an iceberg right ahead. Officers ordered that women and children should go first. Language Focus Set. Summarizing. In 100 words, write the essence of the tragedy focusing only on decisions. Then in a second 100 words, summarize only the role of the environment. This trains focus and comparison. Language Focus 8. Reflective writing. Write a short paragraph titled, "If I Had Been on Deck," to practice conditional forms and the language of choice under pressure. Further perspective on humility as a system property. Organizations sometimes think of humility as an individual virtue, but it can be engineered into schedules, checklists, and alarms. A humble schedule builds slack so that warnings can interrupt. A humble checklist forces a pause for rechecks precisely when people feel most certain. A humble alarm is hard to silence. Humility, in this sense, is not an attitude, but a design feature. It lowers the chance that pride will march a group past the very sign that says, "Stop." Further perspective on signals and noise. Every safety-critical environment has more messages than minutes. The question becomes, which signal gets through first? Prioritize by potential harm, not by habit. A warning about ice should leapfrog a packet of personal telegrams. A tone reserved solely for distress should cut through other sounds. This is not cruelty to commerce. It is kindness to life. Further perspective on leadership under uncertainty. Leaders need two simultaneous tones, the calm that prevents panic and the clarity that prevents denial. Words matter. So do logistics. A leader's best sentences are backed by ladders, lamps, and lifeboats ready to move. Trust forms when speech and preparation agree. A young telegraph clerk in New York taps out a message for a passenger who is, at that precise moment, walking along a ship's warm corridor. The message will never reach him. Decades later, the yellowed form sits in a museum case. Visitors lean close and read the brief, friendly sentence, and someone always whispers, "He never got this." The gap between intention and arrival is the shape of tragedy at a human scale. A sailor on Carpathia, stationed on a rope ladder, feels the cold climb through his boots. Each time a figure appears in the dark, he says, "I've got you," in the same voice, as if he has been saving it for this exact night. The phrase makes people try 1 inch harder. Later, he will not remember how many times he said it. He will remember only the one time he wished he had said it sooner. A woman in a boat looks back and realizes she cannot invent enough memory to fill the space where her husband should be. She will eventually build an ordinary life, because most people do, but a part of her inner world will remain in the North Atlantic. History books cannot count such rooms. Inquiry is the social art of asking what happened, without deciding first whom to punish. Done well, it honors grief, corrects error, and changes rules. Done poorly, it becomes theater. The post-disaster inquiries that mattered treated testimony as raw material for procedure, not performance. That distinction is the difference between a memorial and a manual. Reform that lasts is reform that practices. Manned radios means shifts, redundancies, and audits. Enough lifeboats means procurement, storage, maintenance, and drills. Clarity about rockets means standardized flares and training that treats ambiguity as improbable, not as acceptable. Paper reforms smile easily. Lived reforms sweat. Repetition is not cynicism. It is education. Every generation inherits a new form of speed, a new glamour, a new reason to believe that physics will make exceptions for brilliant ideas. The Titanic story repeats softly, "It will not." That sentence is not a refusal of progress. It is the condition for progress that lasts. Task 1. Shadow read one paragraph aloud, imitating rhythm and intonation. Record yourself and listen for pacing and emphasis. Task 2. Write 5 sentences that use past simple for events. The ship departed. Past continuous for background. Passengers were dining. And past perfect for prior conditions. Warnings had arrived. Task 3. Create a 2-column table. Decision and consequence. Fill 10 rows from the narrative. Then rewrite each pair with if, then, to drill conditional logic. Task 4. Summarize the Californian controversy in 80 words and then in 40 words. Precision is vocabulary's best friend. Task 5. Compose a short opinion paragraph. Should speed records ever outrank safety margins? Use however, moreover, nevertheless, and therefore. Further perspective on structural materials. Steels exist on a spectrum. Temperature moves them along that spectrum. What works at room temperature may behave differently near freezing. Engineers know this. Budgets and schedules sometimes pretend not to. The practical takeaway is simple. If cold is in the route, cold must be in the test. Further perspective on margins. A margin is not waste. It is an investment in uncertainty. Extra lifeboats, extra watchstanders, extra drills, each looks unnecessary until the precise night when only the extras remain. Margins are the quiet heroes of dull days. Dull days are the goal. Further perspective on maintenance. A safety system is a living thing. Ropes rot, lamps dim, and checklists breed complacency if never challenged. Maintenance is the ritual by which an organization tells its future self, "We cared enough to make your night easier." A child visits a maritime museum and sees a tiny shoe behind glass. The card reads, in small type, "Recovered, 1,912. The child asks, "From where?" and learns a new meaning from far away. That moment plants a seed. Stories matter because they change what we notice. Years later, the same child, now an adult at work, hesitates for 1 second over a safety warning and chooses the careful option. No one will connect the two events, but the line exists. A retired radio operator teaches a community class about emergency procedures. He shows students how to speak into a microphone, slowly, calmly, with numbers repeated. He tells them that clear words are a form of warmth, because they make frightened people feel less alone. The room understands. Some lessons do not age. Aviation. When weather degrades, pilots slow down, take vectors, and review checklists out loud. Medicine. When conditions change, teams pause to confirm drugs, doses, and identities, with readbacks as guardrails. Software operations. When alarms fire, responders triage, escalate, and log actions for later learning. In each domain, the themes rhyme with 1,912 signals and priorities, margins and drills, humility and leadership. The sea remains a teacher even when no one is aboard a ship. What, finally, does the Titanic story offer? A mirror. We see ourselves in ambition, pride, routines, kindnesses, and hesitations. And a map. We trace decisions to consequences, signals to actions, and systems to outcomes. The map is not hard to read. Reduce speed when the unknown grows. Keep the watch awake. Treat warnings as guests of honor. Build for more than the expected. Practice until you are bored, because boredom builds the reflexes that survive surprise. Respect the ocean, literal or metaphorical. not because it is cruel, but because it is indifferent. There is a temptation to let the story end in sorrow, yet it also ends in service, in regulations that keep midnight radios alive, in ships stocked with enough places for everyone, in drills that make strangers into quick teams, in museums that keep names bright, in teachers who use this narrative to help students master not only English, but also attention. The wreck is fading. The lesson does not have to. Read the narrative once for plot, once for language, and once for lessons. On the second pass, underline phrases you want to borrow. On the third, write 3 tiny case studies from your own life where the same logic applies. Speak 1 paragraph aloud each day for a week. If you teach, assign your learners a role: captain, lookout, operator, passenger, and ask them to write a 150-word account in that voice. Practice is the rope ladder we throw ourselves. The Titanic was a ship, a system, a city, and a symbol. It carried art and coal, crystal and rope, pride and love, safety and risk, order and error. On a quiet April night, ice pressed those pairs against each other and showed which of them had been overestimated. Out of that failure came reforms that now read like common sense. Common sense is what yesterday's pain looks like once it is finished teaching. If there is a single sentence worth carrying away, let it be this: build your brilliance on a foundation of humility. Communicate as if clarity were warmth, and practice until safety is not an act of heroism, but a habit. Enjoyed this story and the language boost? Share this video with a friend or family member who's learning English, and talk about the Titanic together to lock in new vocabulary. Then hit subscribe on English Avenue today and turn on the bell so you never miss our next graded readers, listening drills, and real-world storytelling lessons. Your support helps us create more rich, easy-to-follow episodes. Let's grow your English step by step, story by story, starting now. Like, comment, stay curious, and practice.